Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. Belief is a strange animal. We all have countless experiences with beliefs, but we would probably struggle to actually define or explain what a belief is. It's one of those things that we just believe is so, even though we don't really know it to be the case. But again, without using the word belief or one of its variants, it is not easy to pin down what this ever so common thing actually is. A classic example of a belief, indeed the classic example, is belief in some sort of supernatural power, such as God. Many people are under the impression that all beliefs are of this nature, meaning that they entail accepting something of a religious nature. When seen in this way, beliefs are really no different from faith. The truth is that most people do use the word faith as a substitute for belief, believing that they are really one and the same. But when we expand the notion of belief beyond classic lines of religious beliefs, we begin to understand that faith is not at all the same thing. For instance, one could say that we believe in numbers, even though nobody would say that they have faith in numbers. Nobody has actually seen or sensed a number. Numbers are purely intellectual creations that don't really exist in the physical world. Yet most of us readily acknowledge the reality of numbers, even without thinking about it. This is actually another form of belief, and one without any religious implications. There are all kinds of beliefs of this nature. Hope is a belief. So is hopelessness. We may feel more comfortable labeling them emotions, but our acceptance of their reality is really a belief. Even something as undeniable as the inevitability of death is nothing more than a belief. It may be a pretty solid belief on whatever scale we have for such things, but it is still a belief. Assuming we are all on the same page up to this point, perhaps we could say that the definition of a belief is the view of some aspect of reality that is not truly demonstrable in any way. Our lives revolve around beliefs. They are the most defining features of our personalities, and also the most defining features of our species. It is unclear if animals have beliefs, but we certainly do. They shape our lives in an infinite amount of ways and truly make us who we are. Without them, we are really robots or computers. With them, we are human. The experience of not believing something is almost as common as believing. Sometimes we just cannot accept something, even though others have no problem doing so. It is unclear what drives this choice, but then again, it is equally unclear what drives our entire facility of belief. It just happens that things are such that we either refuse to believe something or we are unable to, even though we might prefer to believe it. Either way, it is as if that particular thing is outside of our personal range of acceptable reality. It happens that the Bible is loaded with beliefs and also has its share of disbeliefs. There are times when the Israelites are all gung-ho on believing in God or God's ability to make things happen, and there are others in which all that seems to have vanished into thin air. There is one verse that describes Abraham as explicitly believing in God, even though he clearly was already a hardcore believer. Somewhere towards the beginning of the Exodus story, when things were just getting going, the Israelite slaves refused to believe Moshe's encouraging words that they would be miraculously freed. In this week's Parsha, there is a fascinating case of disbelief, followed almost immediately by acceptance for no apparent reason. The Parsha is called Vayigash. That word means he approached, a reference to Judah approaching Joseph to plead for mercy in the face of being caught in red-handed guilt. It was all a setup, but there was no denying that the youngest of the brothers, Benjamin, had been caught with the personal goblet of Joseph, the viceroy of Egypt. The brothers had no choice but to return to Egypt and face what they had to assume was death or permanent slavery. It was at this point that Judah stepped up to speak face-to-face with Joseph and to try to somehow mitigate things. In the midst of his monologue explaining the family history, Joseph finally revealed himself as their long-lost brother whom they had sold as a slave 20 years earlier. When this apparently miraculous reunion was complete, despite all the shame and guilt the brothers faced for their treachery to Joseph, he forgave them and explained to them the current situation. The famine, which had struck the entire region, would continue for another 5 years. They were all to come to Egypt to live, where he would provide them the lifestyle that they were used to. But they first had to head back home, carrying the grain that they had already purchased and various other gifts from Joseph, and to tell Jacob that Joseph was still alive and that he was the ruler of Egypt. Then they were to convince him to move to Egypt to spend the rest of his days with the son he had given up for dead. This would not be an easy thing to do. Jacob had been promised the land of Canaan as an everlasting inheritance by none other than God. To leave the land might be seen as an act of betrayal. Plus, they had to convince him that Joseph was still alive, a tall order since they had originally shown Jacob Joseph's bloody coat, demonstrating that he had been killed in some manner. How could they face their father with this news? What would he think of them after all these years? Would he believe them or just assume that this was part of the same story that they had already tried on him? As it turns out, when they returned to Canaan and their father and told him that Joseph was still alive and that he was the ruler in Egypt, he didn't believe them. The verses in the Torah read, quote, "His heart became numb, for he could not believe them. Then they told him all the words of Joseph that he spoke to them, and he saw the wagons that Joseph sent to transport him. Then the spirit of Jacob, their father, was revived. Then Israel said, 'My son Joseph still lives. I will go and see him before I die.'" Shortly after they all began the journey towards Egypt, God spoke to Jacob in a dream, telling him to not be afraid of going to Egypt. Quote, "There I will make you into a great nation. I will go to Egypt with you, and I will bring you back again. Joseph will place his hands upon your eyes." This prophetic dream would, of course, have momentous implications. The verse about Joseph placing his hands on Jacob's eyes is a hint that Jacob himself would die in Egypt, which is indeed what happened. But the rest was the promise that the family of Jacob would become the great Israelite nation while in Egypt and would emerge from there through divine intervention. This dream thus foretold the Exodus. As vast as the implications of this dream may be, we are going to focus on a much smaller matter: Jacob's refusal to believe that his son Joseph was still alive. Why didn't he believe what his sons were telling him? What does it mean that his heart became numb? Furthermore, whatever the explanation may be for these questions, why did Joseph ultimately believe his son's words and accept that Joseph was indeed alive and that he would go to Egypt to see him? What changed between the initial disbelief and the eventual belief? These are not easy questions to answer. There is very little to go on in the text. Even that strange phrase, quote, "his heart became numb," may not be much of a clue, since it seems from the verse that this was a result of the disbelief and not the cause. But perhaps it does tell us something. The word for numb is extremely rare in the Bible. It isn't entirely clear that this is the translation. It could also mean skipped or stopped or turned or several other possibilities. It seems that the Torah means to say that Jacob fainted upon hearing what his sons were telling him. He fainted out of disbelief. Fainting was Jacob's involuntary reaction to his own disbelief. He confronted his own skepticism and lost consciousness. We don't know why we don't believe certain things. It seems that we just can't believe them, no matter how hard we try. What causes this? In Jacob's case, perhaps the disbelief was necessary because he didn't want to risk getting his hopes up after all these years. He had to believe to protect his own emotional state. There was just too much at stake to simply take things at face value and accept what was indeed true. Jacob's reaction to his own forced disbelief was to faint. He was torn between wanting to believe and needing to disbelieve. This was too much for anybody, even one as strong as Jacob, to deal with. So why did he ultimately come to believe what they were telling him? This again forces us into the murky realm of belief. Just as we don't always understand why it is that we cannot believe something, it is equally true that at times we cannot fathom why we believe something. We simply accept that it is true regardless of whatever contrary indications might be in the mix. In the case of Jacob, the only stimulant to this newfound belief was that, quote, "they told him all the words of Joseph that he spoke to them, and he saw the wagons that Joseph sent to transport him, then the spirit of Jacob, their father, was revived. But he had heard all that before and presumably had already seen the wagons. He somehow was revived by what he was already aware of. He went from disbelief to belief, from fainting to recovery, for no apparent reason. This is the way the mind works, whether we like it or not. We are forced into disbelief, even though we may prefer to believe. But we were just as easily turned to belief for no great reason. Something enters the mind that hadn't been allowed in previously, and the mind switches from disbelief to belief. It is a very personal miracle that takes place right smack in the mind. Did Jacob choose these states of mind, or did they simply happen to him? We don't know, just as we really don't know why the exact same thing happens to us many times in our lives. Belief is among the most wonderful and most mysterious experiences in the vast human panorama of experiences. It is the ability to shape reality the way we wish. But sometimes this ability seems to not be entirely in our hands. It is almost as if it is being imposed upon us by some other power. Perhaps our beliefs are a complex combination of our own experiences and inclinations, along with certain inspiration that comes from outside. If this is indeed the case, then belief would truly be a window into the vast spiritual reality that we live within. It could be our means of accessing that which is normally inaccessible. At times, this is too much to handle and we cannot believe. But at others, we find that the world can be a different place if the mind is opened up. Shabbat Shalom.